Today we create this cool card effect inside of HTML and CSS. First of all, let's start by creating a container with the class of card. And inside of this card container, we have another container that has the class of inner. And inside of this inner card, basically, we have two more containers. And one is the class of .front, which is the front of the card. And the second div has the class of .back, or basically back, which is the back of the card. And now we can basically have an h2 inside of here and say my skills, and we probably have a short paragraph that includes or contains 50 words. We are just going to generate some random words. Now we'll copy those lines in here, and for the h2 we say my sister, for example, for whatever reason. So basically this is the front of our card and this is going to be the back of our card. So let's go inside of CSS and start to style our cards. First of all, let's style our card. Let's say we want to have a color of white, a font family of monospace, and let's just save that and let's use text align of center. So now this is the front and this is the back of our card. So let's keep going by targeting our front and our back of the card, and let's say we want to have a back face visibility of hidden, because now once the back face, or basically once the back of our card or of a card shows, it is basically hidden, which will basically mean I'm going to show it to you once I use .back, and I'm going to set transform rotate Y to 180 degrees, which basically means we are going to rotate this card to the back, because we're going to rotate it by 180 degrees. 360 degrees are basically a complete round, and 180 degrees basically means you take a paper, for example, and you rotate that paper to the back. And once we save this, this container here is basically hidden because we rotated it to the back, and backface visibility says that once it shows the back face of something, this thing basically gets hidden. Hope that was understandable. Nevertheless, we now want to have a background for our element. So let's say background, for example, let's use red, and now we have this red background color. But let's define different backgrounds for our back and our front page. So now let's go to .front, and let's say we have a background of Rebecca Purple, but that looks terrible. So we are going to create a conic gradient by saying we want to use RGB of 000, and we want to go to RGB of 000. We're going to save this. Now I obviously choose a slightly different color, and I want to have maybe something like this. And now I can obviously also say our first color should go from 0 degrees to 180 degrees, and our second color should go from 180 degrees to 360 degrees. And now we basically have this effect, and I think it looks pretty cool. Maybe I should go to 14 for this one, so it gets slightly closer to the other color. And now like this, it looks pretty cool in my opinion. So now we want to basically rotate this area once you hover over the card. So we are going to say, okay, .card, and once we hover over the card, we want to do something to .inner, because .inner basically includes our front and our back. And once the user hovers over our card, we basically just want to rotate the entire card, so front and back, by 180 degrees, which basically means we are going to do transform inside of our .inner, a container, and we'll say rotate Y by 180 degrees to flip the entire card. And as you can see, this one flips the card and it looks terrible, because we need another option inside of the .inner container by using transform style preserve 3D. And this basically means once we rotate .inner, which we do right here, or transform .inner, we want to preserve the 3D style, and it should basically keep that into consideration. And now once we hover, you can see it has my sister right here and my skills right here. Obviously still looks terrible, so we are going to use a perspective of 1000 pixels, and yeah, it doesn't change too much. And the next thing we are going to do is use our position of relative to for our card container, and now we are going to use position absolute inside of our .front and .back element. Now let's also add a padding of 40 pixels, for example. Now it looks like this. Obviously, this still doesn't really look perfect, but we can, for example, say that we want to copy this conic gradient, and we're going to copy and paste this one to the back face, but we want to use some white colors, for example, for the back side of our card. So maybe let's use this, and now it basically looks like this. Obviously, it would probably make sense to use a black color for the text inside of our backside, and now it looks like this. Now let's say that the width of our card is probably 400 or 500 pixels, like this, and now we get this effect already, which looks pretty cool in my opinion. Maybe we could say that this one is probably slightly darker, and now we have this effect, and I think it looks really pretty good. Now we could also say, okay, for front and back, let's use a border radius of 10 pixels. So now we have rounded borders, still looks pretty cool. And I also want to use a transition for dot inner. So once we hover over the card, I basically want to have a smooth transition between those two states, if you want to say so. So we want to basically use all, 0.5 seconds, and let's say ease. And now once we hover, we basically get this cool flip effect. And as you can see, if I have perspective of 1000 pixels, it looks like a cool 3D effect. And if I remove perspective of 1000 pixels, it looks, yeah, kind of weird to me, to be honest, because it doesn't really look 3D anymore. So I really recommend to use this 3D perspective property to make it, yeah, really look pretty cool. So obviously it looks kind of right, but it's not perfect yet. So let's do H2 of margin bottom, and let's say we want to have 10 pixels, for example. Looks a little bit better already. And let's now use an animated border to animate the border behind our card, if you want to say so. So let's go ahead and target our dot front by using colon after, and now we say we want to have a content that is basically empty. We want to use a background that is red for now, let's say that. And now let's also say we want to have a position of absolute. And now we want to use inset of -3 pixels. And now we have this background basically. So yeah, looks kind of terrible, but it is what it is for now. Let's now use a conic gradient again. And now let's say for this conic gradient, we want to use our background color. So we are going to go up to our body and we'll copy our background color. We'll take this background color, and you'll see in a second what it's going to do. We're going to paste it in a couple of times here, as often as you basically want. And this looks pretty terrible for now, but let's say we want to use yellow after we use the background color twice. Let's say we want to use red for this one here, and now let's paste another background here, and let's use blue for the third color. And what this basically does, it just says, okay, create a gradient that has two parts of the regular background color, as you can see. Then one part of yellow, two parts of the regular background color, one part of red, two parts of the regular background color, and one part of blue. And by doing so, it really looks like the colors are basically fading into the background. Now it obviously looks kind of terrible, so I'm going to use set index of -1 to push it behind the card. And by doing so, we basically get this cool effect already. So let's now say we want to have a border radius of 10 pixels as well, because our card has a border radius of 10 pixels as well. And now I want to use -1 pixel for the inset, because this makes the border slightly more subtle, if you want to say so. Now we need to animate this border to make it look like really cool, and we can do so by using a simple trick. We are going to use from variable --angle, and this angle basically says what the angle of the gradient is, and we need to change this angle. And we can change this angle by, first of all, creating a property by using a property, and then we say we want to define the property --angle. We are going to define a syntax, and the syntax is obviously the angle syntax. We want to use an initial value, and since we want to start from 0 degrees and go to 360 degrees, the initial value is 0 degrees, and then we want to use an inherits property that says false. And now we can use this angle to animate an animation by using add keyframes, and as an identifier we can say rotate. Now we want to start from an angle of 0 degrees, and we want to go to an angle of 360 degrees. And this is basically our animation. So now we need to say our front after element needs to get an animation, and we say the animation is rotate over a time span of 8 seconds. Now we want to have a linear transformation, and we also want to have an infinite loop right here, so it basically loops forever. And now we basically see we have this animation for our background, or if we want to say for our border. Now we can copy and paste this once more, and we use a filter of blur of maybe 2 pixels or 3 pixels. And as you can see, this basically adds a blur. I think the blur is a little bit too strong, so we're going to use 1 pixel for the blur. And now we have this blur behind or in front of our elements, if you want to say so. And we are going to use before for this one. And now it basically looks like this. Obviously, we can make this card look a little bit better by going to SVG icons, for example, and then we are just going to SVG repo or whatever you want to do. Then you can, for example, use whatever icon you want, and we are going to go for skills, for example. Let's just say we want to use this icon. I'm going to download this icon. I'm going to drag this icon into our folder. I'm going to rename this to skills, for example. I'm going to right click here and press open with, and we are going to open it with the text editor. We're going to copy this line right here, and now we are going to paste this one right above our my skills header. We're going to save the file, and now it should look pretty weird because most of the time those icons are way too big. So we're going to decrease the size to 40 pixels, for example, right here inside of the icon, and we're going to use 40 pixels for the height as well. And now we have this icon. Obviously the color doesn't really look too good, so we can go in here, and usually you can change the color by using the fill property, and you can, for example, say that you want to use FFF, which is usually just white. And as you can see, we now have this white icon. We can also use a class that says SVG to style this SVG icon. Now we can go inside of our CSS file, we can target our .svg and say we want to have a margin bottom of maybe 20 pixels, or let's say 40 pixels, for example. Whatever you want, it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to waste too much time with this, but you can obviously choose a value that suits your needs basically. And this is how you can create this card inside of HTML and CSS.